context of white supremacy, Gus T. Renegade, and Justice, another program to share constructive information on what racism, white supremacy is and how it works. Number one, definitely want to remind everyone that CRE 7 has a program this Saturday, August 16th at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. Please, I think she has constructive information. Please check her program out if you think it would be a constructive investment of your time and energy. That is this Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. Counter-racist evolving engineer here at Blog Talk Radio. Support her efforts. Again, I want to make sure my co-host is with me. Justice, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Outstanding. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Outstanding. We're going to get constructive information today, hopefully, and give our listeners an opportunity to call in if they should have questions or comments. The number is 347-215-6071. One more time, 347-215-6071. We'll get to some callers a little bit after we get the discussion going. I also wanted to take one small moment. Suspected racist known as Becky Perry. She had agreed to come on the program to talk about racism, white supremacy, and she reneged on her agreement. The reason she gave for doing this was because she did not want her name associated with speaking against racism, white supremacy. She wanted to make sure she could be anonymous, and she didn't think that could happen. She just didn't want her name to be associated with being a white person speaking against racism, white supremacy. I suspect she was practicing racism, white supremacy, so now her name is associated with being a white person that I suspect is maintaining and practicing racism, white supremacy. Moving forward to a white person who is willing to share constructive information about racism, white supremacy. Our guest today, calling in from Tennessee. She is currently working on a brand new book, Whispering Black. She talks about how white people basically don't speak honestly about racism, white supremacy, and just really don't communicate directly about racism and how that in itself is an act of racism and maintains the system of white supremacy. She's calling all the way from Tennessee. She's done a lot of different projects. She'll be able to share that with us. She was working on films when I first contacted her. We had to wait a little while to get the program, but she is with us today. Molly Secours, are you there?
I am here. Thank you.
Outstanding.
It's a pleasure to be
I want to
here.
make sure. Thank you. We're glad to have you. I want to make sure I am pronouncing your last name correctly. Is it Secours?
It's Secours. Well, it depends on what part of the country you're in and if you're my relative or not. The S is silent if you say it in the purely French, with the French accent. I say Secours, but I have family members that say Secours. So you were right no matter what.
Okay. I'll say Secours then, since you pronounce it Secours.
Okay, great. I'll answer.
Okie dokie. Could you please share with my audience, people who might not be familiar with your work, what it is you do and anything you think would be helpful so that they get a better idea of who we're speaking with today?
Well, I am a writer, filmmaker, speaker, and most everything that I write about, speak about, and make films about is relevant to racial and social justice. I guess that's the Reader's Digest snapshot of, I guess, how I would describe what I do. I'm currently working on a number of films right now that are relevant to infant mortality in Tennessee. I'm working with a group of youth, and we've been making films and public service announcements about infant mortality. And if you aren't familiar with some of the facts surrounding infant mortality is predominantly African Americans, Latinos experience a much higher rate, and many of the reasons for that are systemic. And that's one of sort of the areas the youth have been becoming educated this past year and a half, and I've been working with them on doing that and giving a voice to that. But I've made films about healthcare, about criminal justice system, about juvenile justice, and all with an eye on how it is that the overrepresentation of minorities, and as much as I am able to in the film, highlighting the ways in which systemic racism plays a part. And I say as much as I am allowed to, because these films are usually funded by one agency or another, or some funding source that sometimes, admittedly, it does not, that what is demonstrated in the film is not to the degree that I would if it were my own film completely. So, white supremacy and systemic racism are always at play. And especially if you are being funded by institutions. So I don't know if that's sort of the snapshot.
Okay. Outstanding. I just want to clarify for our listeners, would it be accurate to say that white people who are providing you with funding to do this work, that they limit what you can say with regards to speaking about the effects of racism, white supremacy? Well,
I would say yes, and I would say that in doing so, and this is very, and I have a feeling that for many of your listeners, what I'm saying is not going to be new, and so I'm probably not shedding too much light, but by virtue of steering the conversation, no matter what it is, in terms of, let's say, a particular film. Well, we want to talk about why babies are dying in Tennessee, and that is our focus. But this isn't a film about institutional racism. It's about what can be done and how we can solve the problem. And so just by virtue of saying, no, what we want to focus on is, the ways in which we can shift to this through medical access and maybe health care and those kinds of things, but those don't get at the bottom of the issue. And most institutions are not looking to delve into the ways in which anyone who is white and part of an institution, participates on a daily basis. And so it's not necessarily saying, well, I don't want you to talk about the racial aspects, but we tend to put out there that, well, we don't see it to begin with, and that's not really the problem. Yes, there may be some aspect of it that has to do with race, and no matter how much you say, well, is it a coincidence? Then the disproportionality of young men and women that are incarcerated that are black. I mean, that is, we have to look at the issues underlying that, or whether it's health care, or whatever it is. And we talk around it, and that's why I was saying, whispering black. We want to talk around the issues. We don't want to accept that we are part of the problem. We are the problem. And I remember, it's been a couple of years ago now, but I was a guest on a show that was really a debacle when I look back on it now, but I was on a show on CNN, a Paula Zahn show a couple of years ago, and I made the statement that they were talking about, well, who's racist and who's not, and I said, if you were born in the United States and you identify as white, you are, without discussion, a racist. There's no way to get around it. And it was probably the most, in terms of this show, they made that to be the most sensational statement that got made during the show, and how radical that was. And I never got a chance to explain, or at least the way that the show came about, was that you cannot be raised in this country, in this society, in this culture, and not be racist. It would be impossible. It would be means virtually impossible. And the point is not whether or not I am racist. I am absolutely a racist. It's what I do for the remainder of my life, or the remainder after the time that I understand that, accept that. How do I disrupt systemic racism? How do I participate less or participate not at all in continuing and in propagating systemic racism and white supremacist policies? And that, to me, is the work for me. It's not for me to claim that somehow I get it. I'm down with my black friends. Oh, yeah, I'm one of the white people that gets it. And I went through that phase when I first started looking at systemic racism and my part in it. And, I had more than one or two temper tantrums about it and wanting to distance myself from being a racist or being identified as a racist. And that resistance is what kept me further and further and further from actually ever doing anything productive at all.
Very interesting. I want to get my co-host to ask questions here, but I want to just clarify for our listeners here. Number one, you are a white person, is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Okie dokie. This program, the C.O.W.S. Context of White Supremacy, I have unfortunately concluded that we are in a system of white supremacy, and the definition that I use for both racism and white supremacy is a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they say is not white. Do you believe that such a system exists, and do you feel that that is a correct definition for that system?
Well, I believe it exists, and I believe that I can imagine how much argument you get for your definition on how much people want to prove you're wrong, and I can't say that I think that's not a proper definition. And I say that because I know the resistance of myself and the resistance of most white people I know in accepting that we are even living within a system, let alone promoting it, let alone that there is a, and I learned this because I've been, I got a cancer diagnosis a couple years ago, and I've been going through chemo and radiation, and I just finished. I'm now about 15 months in remission. And I never understood until the diagnosis, the day they said, you have cancer, I never understood the survival instinct that welled up inside of any soul, any person that is living. I never understood it until I experienced it. I had no idea that there was something that could rise up in me that I had no control over, or any even understanding or consciousness of, that could rise up and impose its will, which was to live. And I knew, in spite of the diagnosis, I knew in spite of the fact, it was stage 4 cancer. I had to have emergency surgery. I was told that it wasn't good. It had spread to the lymph nodes. I was, everything that I was told about this disease, that my life was in danger, and yet something rose up in me to survive. Well, I believe that there is something inside of us that knows that we live within a diseased universe, if you will, a diseased world where white supremacy permeates everything. And there is a survival instinct inside of us, and those of us who classify ourselves as white, that possesses that same survival instinct. And most of us deny it and or are unconscious of it, I believe. And it is that strong and powerful.
Very interesting. I'm passing this to Justice so she can ask questions, but I did want to note, in terms of resistance to that definition of white supremacy, I have never had a white person come on this program and offer a syllable of resistance to that definition. Every white person who has been on this program has agreed with that definition. The only people I have ever had to disagree with that definition have been non-white people, and I think that is extraordinarily significant in doing this work, and one of the principal reasons that I maintain non-white people, for the most part, are the ones who do not understand racism, white supremacy, what it is, and how it works. Non-white people are the ones who are not conscious about what's happening within the system of white supremacy. But again, no white person has, and I've had way more white people on this program than non-white people, no white person has ever disagreed with that definition on this program. Justice, rock and roll, your turn to ask questions, ma'am.
Okay. I have a few. What do white people practice? Why do white people practice white supremacy?
Why do we practice? Well, I think we practice what we know. I think we practice because we were born into a system. And, very few people that I know question that. And even the ones that do, those of us who do question it, do not make it a part of our daily practice. Because to me, and this is just in my personal life, my experience is that my only hope of dismantling it is daily disruption and daily consciousness. And there are far too many days that go by for me personally that even given some of the work and the focus that I have, there are far too many days that I can go and not remember that at every moment there's an opportunity for me to disrupt it. So I can only imagine that people who have not explored it or acknowledged or even care, there are people that don't care. Most people don't care. And most people deny. So people are practicing what they know. I use the analogy all the time is a fish doesn't question what water it swims in. It doesn't even know it's in water. It just swims in it. And to me, practicing white supremacy is a little like, swimming in the water. You don't see it. You breathe it. It's there. And getting outside of it, or sticking the gills up. You're in it. It's what you know. And it's far too easy for a white person to remove themselves from any situation that allows them to take accountability. Now there are, and you've probably had, dozens or I don't know how many people you've had on the show, but it's one thing to say, oh, isn't that awful, or yes, something must be done, and another thing to see yourself as part of the something that needs to be done, making the connections. There was several years ago, there was a situation in the part of town where I live in Nashville, East Nashville, and there was a community meeting where people were getting together. This was an area where middle-class whites were moving into a neighborhood that was predominantly black and buying up homes and renovating, raising the taxes, and then, of course, what happened was many of people of color in the neighborhood were moving out, and this was becoming, it was gentrification 101. And they were having neighborhood meetings where they were identifying young black males between the ages of 12 and 18 with hoodies on as being suspects in crimes. And that was the extent of the description. And trying to get people to understand and articulate that this is why 60-some% of the jail space is being taken up by people of color, and how I, as a white person, when I go to these meetings or when I live my life in a way where I can actually, with a straight face or with sincere fear, say that young black males between the ages of 12 and 18 wearing a hoodie are reason enough to call the police, that act alone and that fear that is used to fuel my racism.
How does that answer my question?
Why do how does that answer your question? I guess I'm not sure that the first part of that I was addressing your question. That is what people do. That's what people know. That's why they practice it. The answer that I don't have is why. I mean, and I do have my suspicion on why people don't disrupt systemic racism is because there are too many advantages.
So the fishbowl thing answer my question, right?
It was part of, yes, it was part of addressing the question.
Okay. When you were talking about, like, the disease earlier, what disease are you talking about?
And I'm sorry, say that again?
What disease are you talking about?
The disease of white supremacy.
Okay.
And that is an analogy that I use, is that I believe that it is a global disease, and that it's something that everyone lives within. I mean, there is no there's no immunity to it. And so when a white person to me says I'm not racist, I believe that's an impossibility.
Okay. Why didn't you just say white supremacy? Why do you just say white supremacy?
I usually say racism and white supremacy in the same sentence. And it depends on the context that I'm talking with someone. And because oftentimes when I'm talking to other so-called white people, I try to link them together and then also follow up with an explanation of why I use the words together. But most white people, or many white people, associate white supremacy with organizations like the Klan and do not have an understanding, or actually are of the opinion that white supremacy is something that a minority of people, or just those kinds of people, are involved in activities that undermine black people, but we're very unconscious or in denial about the ways in which everyday people who are not part of an organization that specifically targets people of color, or undermining the well-being of people of color, that we like to, as a white person, we like to see the problem over there as those people. And so oftentimes I try to pair the words together so people understand that they're linked together and they are the same.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you have some more questions, Justice?
No.
Okie dokie. I will come back and check a couple minutes. Hopefully you'll think, as we continue to converse, you'll think of some more questions, and we'll get an opportunity to ask. Again, Molly Secours, Context of White Supremacy. I wanted to first, just for clarification, as a white person, are you a racist white supremacist?
Well, as I said, I don't believe there is anyone who is classified as white that is removed from the label racist. I'm a racist in recovery, as I like to say. And I say that because I feel that by the time I die, I will be much less racist in my tendencies, my speech, my actions, and more conscious because that is my goal. It is a conscious choice. Part of what is called so-called white privilege is not even having to think about it or address it or do anything about it. And so I see myself very much like a work in progress. But yes, I consider myself a racist in recovery.
Excuse me. As a racist white supremacist, have you at any point mistreated someone because that person was not white?
I would say to you that I would like to think that I hadn't, but there are too many situations where I know that I have hurt someone of color. And some of it has been through my, certainly before I became conscious of my participation in white supremacy, but even throughout, even from that time forward. I would say that there was a level of unconsciousness before that time that I wouldn't even begin to, I wouldn't even be able to begin to account for those, I would say, more than moments. I would say certainly my lack of action, my lack of conscious action has contributed to many because, as I said, a simple act of identifying, I'm going to go back to this instance, identifying young black males as a source of fear, as a source of caution, as a source of justification to call the police puts me in a situation where I am contributing to the demise, the degradation, the destruction of young black and brown lives. So yes, I have.
Okay.
I mean, by not acting, even if I haven't done something overtly, by not acting, I have.
This is one thing I think is very important, and I have not read Whispering Black, but I would be very interested in reading it. This is one area that I think a lot of alleged anti-racists, one way that they practice white supremacy is that they will concede, yes, I am a white person, and they'll even go a step further. Yes, I am an admitted racist white supremacist, but what they will do is say, well, I'm a racist, a white supremacist because I benefit from the system of white supremacy, which I don't doubt, but they tend to not say, I am a racist white supremacist and I practice directly and or indirectly abusing and mistreating non-white people, which I think is very important. Do you feel that as a white person, when you say that it is impossible for a white person to be raised in this culture, the system of white supremacy, that for a white person it is impossible to not be racist white supremacist? Are you saying it is impossible to be a white person in this system and not participate in mistreating non-white people?
Well, I am never going to say the word impossible. I mean, in that respect, yes, I have said it's impossible to not start from that. If you were born into a system and you have ingest it. So I'm not saying that it's impossible to make progress. It's impossible to become more aware. It's impossible to actually become less destructive. Where I personally, my struggle and my challenge is to say to you that I consciously do harm to people of color or non-whites. I can't tell you that. I cannot say that to you, because there is, as a human being, doing harm to anyone, me personally, doing harm to anyone is something that my constitution and my spirit cannot withstand. And so I say to you, I have done. I certainly don't make choices that I consciously believe are going to harm someone else. But I know that because of my imperfection and my my humanity, that I have, and ways in which I will never probably be able to articulate or know fully, because I have caught myself in situations where I have. So I know that I know that I am participating in a larger, sort of in a larger context.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
No, ma'am. I want to be very clear in the business of working against racism, white supremacy. Very important to get clarity in these discussions. And I also wanted to point out that you did use the term impossible verbatim in your article.
Yes.
Let's get over it. Racism, that is. You did use the term impossible not to be racist. But
right.
I do want to get clarity on this, because I think it's very important for non-white people to understand my question. And if you don't think it's true, that's fine too. But I just want to be clear. Do you think, as a white person in the system of white supremacy, that if you are white, it is impossible to not practice abuse and mistreatment of non-white people? I'm not really concerned with whether they do it consciously or unconsciously. Just being a white person in the system of white supremacy, does that mean you are going to participate in the abuse and mistreatment of non-white people?
Yeah, I do believe in what you're saying. And then when
okay.
Yes, no, I do believe that. I do believe that it's impossible to not be participating, and it is only the degree that you disrupt and work against it that progress is made. But yeah, I'm yes, and like I said, consciously or unconsciously, I have, I have as a white person, and on a daily basis. And again, it's the degree that I participate and not participate, the degree that I disrupt and that I don't disrupt on a daily basis. It's not something that is done once. It's not a decision that you make one moment in time. It is a daily thing. And so in that, I have discovered that it's impossible to be conscious 24/7, then the answer is yes.
Again, Molly Secours, context of white supremacy. And you said, as an admitted racist white supremacist, that you get a lot of benefits being a white person in this system, a lot of privileges. It's easier for you to do things as a white person. Why do you do this work, ostensibly working against that system that benefits you so much?
Well, without sounding, I don't know how to. The only way that I can explain it to you in a way that that would articulate I guess the word I'm going to use is divine intervention, and that I never had any consciousness that A, I would be involved, or B, that there was any work to be done, probably until about 15 years ago. And I was on an airplane, and basically I'm not a person who goes to church. I have been to church, but I'm basically not part of any particular religion. And basically was spoken to. And it was when I was moving to Nashville and had really little understanding why I was moving here. And I was moving here actually to be with the man who turned out to be my husband. And on the way there, I was in meditation or prayer or whatever and said, what in the world am I doing? And basically I was told there is work in racism that you need to do yourself, and this is the place you're going to do it. And it came that direct and that clear and that strong, and I never thought about it again for 2 years. But I wrote it down that night, and it began, the opportunities began to open up to me. And I was in situations where eventually I found myself at the Race Relations Institute at Fisk University in Nashville, and met Dr. Ray Winbush and Naomi Tutu, and got involved in the summer institutes and started basically going to school. And that is where I first heard Dr. Frances Cress Welsing and Neely Fuller and people like that. A rare opportunity for anyone, but especially for someone who is classified as white in Nashville, Tennessee. And that pretty much changed my life, in terms of my consciousness. And like I think I mentioned this before, it didn't come without some temper tantrums, and it was one of those moments where I realized my life wasn't going to be the same. Very much like when I got a diagnosis of cancer, I knew my life was not going to be the same 2 years ago. And that what was true, or what I thought was true at that time, was not going to be true anymore. And I feel very similar about that experience.
Very interesting. I'm going to ask one more and then check on my co-host, see if she has some other questions.
Okay.
I do think it's very important, as I said, non-white people, at least my observation, non-white people tend to be very confused about racism, white supremacy, and I think that is a principal part of our victimization as non-white people, in that we really don't have a clear understanding about what racism, white supremacy is and how it works. And I have found that non-white people just don't have a proper suspicion for white people, especially given that, you just said that you do believe it's true that if you are a white person in the system of white supremacy, you are going to participate in the mistreatment of non-white people. Do you think it would be constructive for the non-white people, victims of white supremacy, do you think it would be constructive if they adjusted their way of thinking about white people, just to what you said, so that no matter what any white person says, that they should think, speak, act, and believe that if they are dealing with a white person in the system of white supremacy, you're dealing with somebody who is a racist white supremacist. Do you think that would be constructive for non-white people in terms of eroding the system of white supremacy?
Well, I would have a hard time, I would have a very difficult time suggesting anything or purporting to know for people of color what would be advisable, what would be enlightening. So I want to be clear about that.
Sure.
As far as questioning the, and I think I would even say I wouldn't advise questioning or suspecting motives, individual motives. I would suggest that white supremacy is so much deeper, runs so much deeper than we can possibly comprehend. That questioning is always, to me, the safest. Questioning the awareness of, in a relationship, whether it's a work relationship, a religious relationship, whichever, questioning the awareness of the person who is classified as white. Questioning whether or not they're, because I do believe that there is the ability, if the spirit is willing, and if the spirit is moving the person, I believe there is the ability of a person who is classified as white to conduct themselves in a way that they are disrupting the inherent instincts that one has as a person who is classified as white in order to benefit, i.e., dominate a person of color. And I think that it is possible to disrupt it. I think it's vigilance. I believe it's, I believe there's a vigilance. And I don't know how many humans there are on the planet are capable of being absolutely trusted to not be undermining. So I think that it is advisable to always be questioning who you're dealing with, knowing that I think it would be almost impossible in this incarnation. I don't think, I don't know if, 50 years from now somehow humans are going to have evolved in a way where there will be people that are pure light and pure peace and that transcends. I hope that's the case, without sounding arrogant. And I say this because of, again, I've, over the last couple of years, my experience, not just in terms of my awareness of race and white supremacy, but as a human being and what I'm capable of has shifted because of an experience of being closer to death. And I really do think that there is an evolution that is possible, but it's not without, like I said, not without vigilance. And so I would recommend that one always be aware of the influence of white supremacy, and that for safety's sake, and I know that I don't have to even go into, I don't even have to explain that, but for safety's sake, I would say, yes, always be aware and always question.
As a non-white person, I do or have found that it is helpful just to ask white people what their view is, what they think. So I might ask for your view, your opinion during the course of the program. I hope you'll be willing to share. I've heard different white people say that they don't feel comfortable telling non-white people what to do. I don't look at it as the white person telling me what to do. I just look at it as them sharing their view as someone who is most likely more informed about racism, white supremacy than I am. I just want to be clear. My question do you think it would be constructive for the victims of white supremacy to adjust their thought, speech, and actions to the belief that if you are dealing with a white person in the system of white supremacy, you are dealing with a white supremacist? Do you think that would be constructive or not?
Yes, I would think that would be constructive.
Okay,
I mean, simply because what we talked about earlier is that I believe that if you are classified as white, you are a white supremacist and an active white supremacist. And only to the degree that you are disrupting are you less so.
Okay.
And am I less so?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Justice, have you been thinking of any questions, or do you have questions about what has been said, or do you have your own questions?
Yes, I do.
Go right ahead.
How do white people practice racism, white supremacy?
How do white people practice racism, white supremacy? Well, and this goes along with what we've been talking about, is the way in which you practice it is to not see yourself as part of it. To remove yourself. When I remove myself from being part of the system, or when I see it as something that is outside of me. So I do that when I ignore, for instance, and I work with a lot of youth and juvenile justice. So when I ignore that an inordinate amount, a disproportionate amount of inmates and ones that I work with and make films with, when I ignore that they are predominantly black and Latino, and I don't question that, and I don't question the ways in which they get there, and that I don't help disrupt the actual, I don't disrupt all of the ways in which they do through school systems, through ways in which youth end up in juvenile justice. I'm practicing white supremacy when I refuse to see myself as part of it. If I'm a teacher and I don't acknowledge that I find young black males more dangerous than I do young white males, or when I find that I am acting out in a way that disproportionately affects young black women in school, and I've a number of students have told me situations where, for instance, in a history class with a teacher who does not allow herself to be questioned and challenged by students about the relevancy or the accuracy of history, is contributing to white supremacy and the continued education of white supremacy.
Okay.
And another example, and this I'm bringing this up because it's such a recent thing, but the whole situation with Professor Gates and the white police officer, and the denial that most of us whites have around that situation, and our willingness to allow it to become a situation where we isolate the actions of the police officer and we see this as an exception as opposed to the rule. That we don't acknowledge that when, and most white people I know have the stories and have the stories historically of ways in which we haven't been identified in the criminal justice system or targeted, and don't acknowledge. I remember when I was 19 years old, this is a long time ago, and I was 19 years old, I was driving a car, I had been drinking, it was Thanksgiving, my lights didn't work, and my registration was expired, and I turned left on a red light. And instead of getting a ticket or being arrested or thrown in jail, the police officer escorted me home and wished me happy Thanksgiving. And there was a time where I was in complete denial that that had anything to do with white supremacy, that it had anything to do with a system that values my life or my well-being over someone of color. I attributed that to being, a lucky break. And most white people do not acknowledge or even articulate those experiences as being a product of white supremacy.
Okay. What do white people practice with racism, white supremacy?
I'm sorry, you know what, you cut out for 1 second. Say that again.
What do white people practice with racism, white supremacy?
Was that why or what?
What?
What do white people practice?
With
What do
racism, white supremacy.
What actions do they practice?
Can you say that again?
I'm trying to get clarification. What actions do white people practice?
Yeah.
Well, a whole lot of things. We practice things every day. As I said, one of the things that white people do is, and what we do and what we don't do. But what we do is we are blindly in denial that we are part of white supremacy. So that is, in not doing something, that is a doing. We are actively in denial that we are part of a white supremacist system which values white life and values not only the subjugation, but we value advancement, and we demonstrate that. As I said, we demonstrate it in education. We demonstrate it when we value the life of white students over black students, and we make that obvious in the graduation rates. When we look at the funds that are distributed to schools and who are in those schools, those are people making those decisions. The thing that people get confused, white people specifically, are confused about white supremacy or claim to be confused because, and then when you break it down and you talk about the system, we deny that we are those systems that are making decisions and taking action every day. So our inaction and our inability, or not ability, our refusal to see ourselves as the people that are making the decisions and taking the actions against. And every day we do it. We do it at the bank, we do it at schools, we do it at the post office. And most of the time, people will tell you that they weren't aware. And it is our active denial that contributes on a daily basis to racism, white supremacy. So it's what we do and mostly what we don't do.
Mm-hmm. What are you doing now, and what have you ever done willfully and on purpose to eliminate racism, white supremacy?
What I've done willfully and on purpose to eliminate white supremacy?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've done, not enough. I've done, I have made it a commitment that every day that I am awake and aware to instances and systems of injustice. And so through my writing, through my filmmaking, and my speaking, I have committed to speaking truths that are difficult for me and for other people to hear, in order to help shift, shift in the way that I can personally. And one of the things that I've learned is that I can only do what I can do myself. And speaking out and witnessing and being as public as I can. So I use the written word and I use my films. And that is my personal commitment. And encouraging, I don't think that you can force anyone, nor do I think that it is profitable to anyone. But by being able to give voice to my perspective of whiteness and how I personally contribute by not doing anything is my personal commitment. So it's for me it's a very personal thing, and it's something that on a daily basis I have to evaluate. So when I see something, that I make sure that I say it. And whether or not it's a situation that is comfortable or uncomfortable, I do what I can to make sure that I don't back away or walk away or stay silent. Again, it's what I do and what I don't do.
Okay. And what suggestions do you now offer to the victims of racism as to what they themselves may, can, and or must do to ensure that racism, white supremacy, is immediately eliminated and or the victims compensated?
I don't have an answer for that question. I'm sorry. I don't have the answer. The only answer that I have is for what I can do, and I believe that white supremacy is something that white people need to take responsibility for and to acknowledge, and I can only take responsibility and say what I can do, and I don't have the answer to that question.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't have any more questions for right now. Thank you.
No? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Doc. I will come back and check, see if you have some more questions. What I wanted to ask about, I guess before I ask, do you think that all of the individuals who are classified as non-white, the victims of white supremacy, do you think it is accurate to say that whatever they are doing, whether they are working against the system of racism, white supremacy, whether they are not working against the system of racism, white supremacy, whatever they are doing, the system of white supremacy is most responsible for the conduct of the non-white people, all of the non-white people in the known universe at this point? Do you think that is correct?
You know what? I'm going to have to ask you to say that again before I answer.
Sure. Do you think the system of white supremacy is most responsible for the conduct of all non-white people in the known universe as long as the system of white supremacy exists?
Right. Yes, I believe that it is responsible in that it controls. I believe that it controls the behavior and sets the boundaries for what kind of life you live. I'm not saying what kind of life you live internally, but externally sets the parameters.
Unfortunately, I agree. The reason I ask that is because I have taken the position that it is not only incorrect, but in my view, it is an act of racism, white supremacy, for any white person to engage in criticizing and speaking bad about any non-white person, regardless of what they are doing. Whatever that non-white person is doing is in response to the system of white supremacy. So I do not think it's correct. And not only that, as I said, I believe it is an act of white supremacy for white people to speak against a non-white person if they don't like what that non-white person is doing, if they don't like how they're going about working to replace white supremacy with justice. Even if the non-white person isn't doing anything to replace white supremacy with justice, I still don't think it's correct for white people to speak against the victims of white supremacy. Do you think that is a correct and logical stance to take as a non-white person in the system of white supremacy?
Well, I agree that it's correct and logical, and I don't know as a human if it's possible. And I say this because there is a separation that already exists with white supremacy, and there is further separation as a human when I'm not really sure that I can say that I agree 100% with the statement, because I think there are, while white supremacy affects the lives of non-whites and is a major, if not total, influence on that person's formation, I believe that there are people of color who have done great acts of violence and injustice that for me to say, or for us to say that there can be no comment made on that, I don't know that I could agree with you, no.
And
that is not to say that we couldn't discuss and say that there are many reasons why that person, became filled with violence and that lives within, and that, that to me is, we could always relate it back to the system, I'm sure. But I'm saying that I'm not sure that I agree that it should never be acknowledged or pointed out. No, I can't say that. That it wouldn't be okay for me to, for instance, to look at, horrific actions done by someone and to stay silent in witness because I am white. No, if I believe that there was great injustice, whether it was injustice towards a fellow person of color or a white person or just anything that was responsible for degrading anyone's life regardless of who they were, I don't think that, I don't agree with that statement, no.
I was going to say that, if it's a non-white person and they're, really mistreating some people and doing incorrect things, that, that should be called out. But in a system of white supremacy, the white people who practice white supremacy are doing the most damage by far certainly more so than anything a non-white person is doing. So I would think if we're going to start pointing fingers at someone doing something incorrect, we should really start at the top, and that would be with the white people who practice white supremacy.
I agree. No, I absolutely agree with you. And what I say as to say that never would there be a circumstance, no. I mean, no, I don't. But I understand what you were saying, and that you start. I guess we may be talking about varying levels. So I went to the instance where I was to turn, or someone white was to turn and not be able to utter a word against violence or against something that degraded someone in some way. And no, I don't think that in the human, in the human family, that's something I can say I agree with.
And I agree. I would think we would all want to work to make sure that people are no one is being mistreated by anyone. Again, I'm just saying, since we are in a system of white supremacy, the people who are doing the most damage by far, the white people who practice white supremacy. And the reason that I brought that up is I am noting that there are white people who allege to be doing anti-racist work who are critical of victims of white supremacy who are attempting to counter racism. And I feel that is extraordinarily incorrect and many of these people are admitted racist white supremacists, to criticize and judge what a victim of white supremacy is doing to attempt to work against racism, white supremacy. If we focus specifically on that, how do you feel about that?
If we focus specifically on a white anti-racist commenting on a person of color or someone who's a victim of racism?
Working against white supremacy. That alleged anti-racist white person doesn't like how that non-white person is choosing to work against racism. They're criticizing him.
Okay. Yeah. I agree with you. I agree with you.
Okay. I wanted to point that out because I do not feel it is in any way speaking gossiping in any way. I've told many of these people directly when they've been on the program, the admitted white supremacist known as Jessica Pettit, the admitted white supremacist known as Tim Wise, I've seen them be critical of myself, of Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. I have seen them be critical of these non-white people and their views, their stance on what should be done to correct the system of white supremacy. And I think that is wholeheartedly incorrect. And I feel that is an act of racism, white supremacy. I feel the correct way to go about that, if you are a white person, admitted racist in the case of these two individuals, and you don't think what that non-white person is doing is correct to work against racism, make sure you put in extra effort to eliminate the system of racism, white supremacy. These people should know more than anyone. Well, they're victims. They might be confused. Not really sure. I'm not going to, waste my time griping and arguing with what they're doing in response to the system of racism. I'm just going to continue to do my work to work against racism, white supremacy. I think that is...
I agree.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying I understand where you're going with the question. When you first asked it, I took it in a more global.
Okay.
And in that context, I think there's a difference between disagreeing with someone's point of view or position or their process or how they do it, and like what you said, criticizing. And that I can disagree with a statement or not agree, But there's a difference between me criticizing you for saying it or using that as a position or a platform. I find there's a distinction there. I mean, are you in agreement with that? That there's a distinction between criticism and disagreement, and because, and even if you are a victim of white supremacy, and your experience informs that opinion, it does not mean that I will agree with that opinion or even be able to relate to that experience. But to criticize you, criticizing you for taking that position or executing your work in the way that you do, I believe that I have no position for that. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah. And I want to clarify. I'm not saying that the non-white person, just because they have taken a position as a victim, that necessarily means that they are correct with the position that they've taken. And I'm also not saying that, that white person who alleges to work against racism, that they need to agree with what that non-white person is doing. But I feel it should really make no difference at all what that non-white person says, what they're doing to work against racism. It really should be totally irrelevant. Unless they're standing on your porch preparing to shoot you or something to that effect, I don't really care what that non-white person is doing. I feel that should be the stance that a white person who alleges to be working against racism, that's the correct stance to take. I don't care what Dr. Welsing's doing. If I don't agree with her approach, I think her book is foolish. Who cares? I don't even have to deal with that. I can do my own work as a white person and can probably be a lot more effective than her because I am white in a system of white supremacy. Who cares about what Gus is doing on his show? Who cares about what Mr. Fuller wrote in his book? It's totally irrelevant, much less to waste time, or I won't say waste time, to invest time and energy in criticizing these people, which I have seen alleged anti-racists do. And not only that, I feel that's an act of racism in and of itself for a white person to be speaking against a non-white person's efforts to counter racism. I want to make sure I ask that. Do you think that is accurate for a white person to speak against the efforts of a non-white person attempting to counter racism, that in and of itself is an act of racism, white supremacy?
Yes, when we're talking about the methods in which a person is going about their anti-racism, whether they are a person of color or not. Yes, I agree with you.
Okay.
And part of that is not just, for me, it does not link purely back to systemic racism. It's more of a philosophy that is, again, very personal, something that is probably much more, for me, divinely inspired. But the criticism of other humans for myself, I have become aware that what is rooted in my criticism of others is rooted in myself. And it is very, a very simplistic way of putting it is the notion of when the finger is pointed, there are three coming back. And I find that when I am in the act of criticizing, there's usually what I'm criticizing exists within me. And that is my personal philosophy and how I go about living my life. So I take it out of, the larger context of this conversation to say that, is that when I'm pointing, it's usually something that I'm being called to look at. And so when I'm doing this work with other white people, what I'm calling, what I'm pointing for them to look at, I'm also pointing to in myself. And that's why I say I'm not removed from this. I'm not removed from any anything.
Again, Molly Secours, Context of White Supremacy. I have one or two. I have two questions. I'll check with Justice, and then we'll take some callers, see if they have any questions or comments. Given that you said that every white person in a system of white supremacy is a racist white supremacist, and that they consciously and or unconsciously participate in abusing non-white people, you are familiar with the work. You said you're familiar with the work of Dr. Welsing and Mr. Fuller.
Yes.
They both think it would be correct and constructive if non-white people did not engage in sexual intercourse with white people as long as the system of white supremacy exists. I believe that that is correct as well. Do you think that would be a constructive step for non-white people to take to discontinue sexual intercourse with white people as long as the system of white supremacy exists?
Well, I've been aware of that I remember the first time I heard Dr. Fuller speak and Dr. Welsing, and I have probably gone back and forth a number of times personally and looking at it from a broader perspective. And at this moment in time, at this juncture, and I've come to that I don't agree that that is the solution or the underpinnings. And I say this from having many friends who are in relationship with with people of color, and friends who are Black and Latino who are with white people, and I don't believe that that is the solution. I don't believe that the restriction or the pledge is the solution or what will solve white supremacy. So I can't say that I agree with that. No.
Didn't say. I want to be very clear. I did not say the solution. Did not say that would solve the problem. I said that it would be constructive in working against the system of white supremacy. So do you think it would be constructive for non-white people to refrain from having sexual intercourse with white people under the system of white supremacy?
Well, if I were to say that I think it's constructive, I think that I'd be saying that that would be solution-oriented. So, no, I don't think it is. I don't think it is key. And I think that for me that is something that I don't agree that it is the solution, because I'm sure that we would deviate in a number of ways, but I believe that in order for us to progress to the fullest extent of who we are as humans, to reach the pinnacle of what we're capable of, that is further encouraging the separation of us as humans. And I think that the work that we're faced with is not dependent on our separation. I think it is dependent on us coming to terms with the roots of our separation. But I can't say that I believe that it is constructive, so no.
Okay. I want to point out, folks that are listening, I did not say non-white people and white people should be separate. Molly Secours, who is white, is together with myself and Justice. We are both non-white right now. I am around white people right now. I have never said that non-white people and white people should be separate. I'm not even really sure that that is possible in a system of white supremacy. My view, it would be constructive for non-white people and white people to refrain from sexual intercourse under the system of white supremacy. You can still chat. We can still do the work of eliminating the system of white supremacy and establishing justice. Just we're going to stay away from the bedroom until that works out. Since you don't think it would be constructive, can you share with our listeners if you think there are any constructive benefits for white people, racist white supremacists engaging in sexual intercourse with non-white people under the system of white supremacy? Is there anything about that happening that is going to work towards eliminating white supremacy?
Well, to say that I think that sexual contact between whites and non-whites is beneficial. What I said was I cannot say to you that I think that it would be constructive, which I'm assuming or I'm guessing being constructive in eliminating white supremacy means that it would be pertinent and pivotal to eliminating white supremacy. So under those guidelines, or with that understanding, I was saying no, I didn't see it as being constructive. And as far as it being, what are the benefits? I don't know what the benefits are. What I do know is that the separation, which comes about as saying, should there be a refraining of black people and white people coming together, I don't understand, nor can I say that I could agree that there could be a dictum of set forth that would be helpful or that would be constructive, where one person took a pledge to not love someone, and whether that be in a sexual way, an intimate way, but to partner with, which is what you're saying in terms of having sexual relations. And I can't say that I agree with that.
That's cool in the gang. I do, again, want to point out for listeners, words are very important. I never brought up the word love. I never said partner. I think that's very important to point out. I did not say that non-white people should not partner with white people, whatever that means. I did not say that non-white people should not love white people, whatever that means. I simply said no sexual intercourse between white people and non-white people. I have seen a wealth of not just non-constructive, but destructive results from these unfortunate relationships. I'll just ask this. Have you seen where sexual intercourse between a white person and a non-white person has had a non-constructive and or destructive impact on the non-white person?
You have to repeat the question.
Sure. Have you seen any examples where a non-white person having sexual intercourse with a white person had non-constructive or destructive results for that non-white person?
I have to say that in terms of talking personally about sexual relationships, which I didn't realize we were talking only about, so we're talking about only sexual acts and not relationships or love. Is that, just so that I'm clear about what we're...
I have never used those two terms, just sexual relationships. I did not say that you can't talk to a white person or hang out with a white person. I never said you got to be separate from white people, just no sexual intercourse. That's it.
Yeah, I'm very, like I said, I've read Mr. Fuller's book and I'm familiar with it. I'm just saying that I cannot say to you that I agree that it is constructive.
Right. I asked specifically if you've seen incidents where non-white people have been harmed, where a non-constructive or destructive result came about from a non-white person having sex with a white person.
In a personal observation or a public observation, or to be honest with you, I have not an example to specifically answer your question. I guess that's
okay.
Yeah.
I have seen a wealth of examples where non-white people, it has been a very destructive thing for them having sexual intercourse with white people. And I want to keep in mind for the listeners, you said every white person is a racist white supremacist in a system of white supremacy. So we're talking about non-white people engaging in sexual intercourse with racist white supremacists. I have seen consistently where this has extraordinarily destructive impact on the non-white person and really retards their ability to understand and speak about honestly the system of white supremacy. I have seen this over and over.
Oh, I agree, because of the nature of white supremacy, that it is, as any kind of intimate sexual relationship is, it's highly charged, and unconscious entering into a relationship with little consciousness of the dynamics, the power dynamic of white supremacy. It is rife with potential for harm for a person of color. And what I was saying to you was, would I be willing as Molly Secours to make a statement that it would be advisable or constructive to refrain from sexual activity? That is something that I cannot state for other people. I'm just not comfortable making that statement. I understand it, and I understand why, but I don't feel that I could say to you with much confidence, I think that is constructive, or I think that is instrumental in dismantling white supremacy. I think that is certainly and undeniably one aspect of many in which there's potential harm. And as you obviously said, you have witnessed. And I would guess that there is much more than, we see everywhere. And I don't feel like I would be able to say that. And I feel that if I did say that many of the people that I know and love would be harmed by my saying that. So that's my resistance there.
No problem. I want to get the phone lines. Again, phone number 347-215-6071. I want to get you to plug your website. It is, if you're listening to this program at Blog Talk Radio, Molly Secours, her website is in the description. All you have to do is click on her name, and it will take you to her website. And if you click on Whispering Black, you'll get to see a PDF file which gives you a lot of great detail about what that project is going to be about. All you have to do is click it if you're listening from Blog Talk Radio, but I want to get her to give it to our listeners who might be listening elsewhere and don't have access to those links. Before I do that, if I could get one yes or no response, do you think a victim of white supremacy is displaying an appropriate level of suspicion of a white person if they are in a sexual relationship with a white person under the system of white supremacy?
Well, suspicion is...
Yes, ma'am. Oh, and yeah, this one I would, yes, I could, if I could make a request to get a yes or a no on this one, that would be, I would appreciate that. If you think a non-white person is displaying an appropriate level of suspicion for white people under the system of white supremacy, if they are in a sexual relationship with a white person.
Well, again, without knowing any of the level of suspicion, the level of awareness, and I know you want a yes or no question or a yes or no answer, and I'm afraid that I'm not really good with yes or no answers, in this format. So I'm so lousy with yes or no in life in general, because I don't think that everything is that clearly defined. And suspicion, I would say that it is healthy to have, to question if you are only offering the word suspicion, and that is the one, just because of the connotation of it. And I don't know the relationship you're talking about. You are talking about any black person or any non-white person anywhere on the planet. I would say that yes, and I would say that suspicion could be replaced with consciousness, awareness, alertness, reticence, all of those things. But if I'm not given an opportunity to expand it so that it is not a one-size-fits-all, then I guess the answer is yes.
Yes, you think that non-white person is displaying an appropriate level of suspicion for white people under the system of white supremacy if they are engaged in a sexual relationship with a white person?
Are they demonstrating? Say that again.
Yes.
Are they just, if they are engaging in a sexual relationship?
In sexual intercourse with a white person, are they demonstrating an appropriate level of suspicion of white people in a system of white supremacy?
And now a new word. Is it an appropriate level of suspicion? I don't have a yes or no answer for that.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know.
Can you please plug your website? I don't know if you have any other links or projects, but if you can at least plug the website, tell them how they can find your site with your articles and everything. We're going to take a quick commercial, and I'm going to hit the phone lines. If you are on the phone line, please don't use speakerphone. It really disrupts the quality of the broadcast. I will call out your area code. You'll be able to ask your question for Molly Secours. Please plug your website, and we'll take a 1-minute commercial and get to the phone lines. Mrs. Secours?
Yes. Oh, you wanted me to tell my website? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
I thought we were going. It's mollysecours.com.
No.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
Hey, I'm still on the radio.
Context. Okay. Context of White Supremacy, Gus T. Renegade, and Justice with Molly Secours. 214. Do you have a question you want to ask Molly Secours? 214. Are you there?
Is that me?
No one. 214. Not hearing 214. 972. Caller from 972 area code. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
You have a question or comment?
Yeah, I've been listening to the show, and I came a little late, so I don't know if I really missed the basis of this whole show. is Molly actually saying, and I'll ask you, Molly, are you saying that all white people are racist?
Yes.
Okay. That's okay.
I'm saying yes. That is where we start.
Okay, so...
Oh, wait a minute, caller. Are you a white person or not?
Yes, and I'm married to a woman of color. And
I didn't get the... Are you a white person?
Yes, I am. And I am married to a woman of color. And I guess I'm really missing... Why isn't a blanket statement like that kind of racist in itself?
Well, and this might have been part of what you missed, is that I said that all white people are racist, that you cannot be born in this culture, in this country, and pretty much anywhere in this world, and if you are classified as white, coming into it, you are racist. It's almost, excuse the religious reference, but it's like original sin, if you will. And that it is only the degree to which I become conscious and disrupt the systemic racism within me, around me, that I have internalized, do I become less racist. And so to that is what I'm speaking is when I say all white people are racist, because we have come into a system. We have been grandfathered in to a system that works on our behalf, and only when we unlearn and disrupt the behaviors that contribute to systemic racism and white supremacy. So yes, that's what I said. 972, if you can hang tight. If you have more questions that you want to ask, we have a lot of callers on the line, so I want to make sure everybody can at least get one in. Then I'll come back to you, sir.
Thank you.
No problem, sir. Just hang tight. 253. We have two callers at 253. The other 253. Do you have a question that you want to make?
Hello, I have a question.
Go right ahead. Oh, wait a minute. White. I'm not even supposed to be doing this. Justice, this is your job. You're supposed to be asking the callers if they are white or non-white.
Are you non-white or white?
I'm a non-white person.
Okay.
Do you have a question or comment?
Yes, I have a question. Molly, do you have offspring?
No, I don't.
Okay. If you did, what would you feel, or how would you feel if he or she dated or married a non-white person?
I don't know how I would feel, since I don't have any offspring, and I would be very concerned for my child and their prospective spouse, if it was a person who was non-white, and I would be concerned for their welfare. I would be concerned that they understood what they were engaging in, and I would be concerned that they were both aware of what might lie ahead for them. As far as how I would feel, at this point, I can say I would certainly concern. And, but beyond that, I don't know what I would do.
The act of being concerned is racist.
Hold on one second. Wait a minute, 972. Hold on. We got a couple.
Oh, I thought I was on mute. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. No, sir. Nobody's muted.
No?
Okay. No problems. Everybody, your mic is live, so...
Okay. Thank you for telling me.
No problem, sir. That was my fault. I will get back to you in 1 second. We have I guess he's on the computer. Is this non-Mighty Wick? Are you there? Question? Mic is open. Are you there, non-Mighty Wick computer user? Okay. 313, area code 313. Are you there?
Yes. How are you this evening?
I am what? Oh, wait a minute. Justice?
I'm a non-white.
Thank you. Go right ahead.
I wanted to ask Ms. Secours. I wanted to ask you now, what do you think the motivation is for this system of white supremacy? Prior to me getting on, she asked you if you wanted your daughter to marry or someone that was non-white.
Right.
I want to ask you this. What do you want or how do you want your grandchildren to look? Do you want them to look like you and your parents? Or would you have a problem with the dark child?
I don't have any preference about how my grandchildren would look had I had them, but I don't have any children. So when she was asking me how I would feel, I would feel concerned because of them bringing a child, or the potential of bringing a child, or even engaging in a relationship facing the forces of white supremacy. And and hopefully, hypothetically, had I raised a child, I would hope that I would have prepared them in some way should this situation ever happen. That is what my concern would be. As far as I don't have any particular preference about what my grandchildren would look like now.
Okay. Well, when you talk to other white people, what do they say?
Well, it depends on what other white people I'm talking to. If
you're trying to wake them up and make them aware of white supremacy, and when the topic comes up about mixed relationships, what do white people generally say about mixing?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It depends on who I'm talking to, but there are white people who are very much against, mixing. There are white people who are scared to death that their child is going to come home and say that they have a black or brown girlfriend or boyfriend. And then there are many people who say it matters not to them, but are also unaware of really what that means. And that it's one thing to say, I don't care, but it's another thing if you don't care because you are completely uncognizant of the fact that white supremacy has a great impact on the person that your son or daughter would be in a relationship with.
Well, tell me this, because I'm trying to get you to say, to horn in on something. Do white people want their children to have white babies? Because you're no longer white, you're mixed. And so I want to ask you to be clear, we have to, in order to deal with white supremacy, we really have to look at this and not be intimidated. I wonder how effective you are with white people when you're talking with them, because there has to be a lot of pressure for you to stand in front of racists and tell them that their behavior is incorrect. I just I'm amazed.
Well, again, it depends. And when you say, how do white people, it depends. There are, white people have varying levels of denial and varying levels of denial of their own racism, of our own racism. And so, and I have experienced where people who are downright adamant that I would never want my child to be with someone who was non-white. It's almost easier and clear who you're dealing with. When someone says, I have no preference at all, and they very well may not until the idea of children comes along. The resistance of and again, it varies. It varies from person, from person, socioeconomic, education. All has to do with how resistant or conscious a person is about what that means. And there are people who are adamant. I have members of people in my family that would be horrified if their children were mixed or their grandchildren were mixed. And I have other members of my family who are very aware of systemic racism, but still don't understand how they would perpetuate white supremacy and probably harm their child, even though they're very well-meaning. And so, again, this is not an either-or. This is not the degrees are varying. But when you're talking about someone's unconsciousness that they are perpetuating white supremacy, the harm is greater, I think, than when someone is at least acknowledging that there are ways in which they're perpetuating systemic racism, and that there are things that they will pass on, or that they will burden a child that is of mixed race, that they will, they will burden them further, and that it could happen. And then there are people, who successfully, or from the outside it looks successfully, are raising children who are mixed, who are engaging in dialogue daily, continually about what's out there and what they're going to be facing, and do the best that they can to be able to ensure their safety and their self-confidence, their self-esteem, all the while understanding that there is a system out there that they're going to be facing for the rest of their lives, and some of what they're going to come up against is not friendly, and much or most of what they're going to come up against is not agreeable to who they are inherently. And I don't know if that answers your question.
I want to check. Justice, do you have a question that you would like to ask?
Yes, I do.
Go right ahead.
What suggestions do you have on white supremacy to tell to non-white people and to me?
Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
What suggestions do you have on white supremacy to tell to non-white people and to me?
Suggestions
on white supremacy.
And suggestions as far as
how to stop it.
Well, again, as I said before, I believe that the onus is on white people to stop white supremacy. And it is, and that is the work for so-called white people to do with other white people. I don't believe that it is, that the onus is on people of color to undo a system that we created. Which is why it's taking so long.
What do you mean by onus?
Responsibility. That it is a white person's, it is white people's responsibility to undo, dismantle white supremacy.
Okay. When everywhere I go, why do white people be on magazines, movies, like everywhere I go? Why does that have to happen?
Well, that is white supremacy in action. It's white supremacy is that what is valued, what is deemed beautiful, and according to white supremacy, magazines, all media is a reflection of what white supremacy values. And obviously, we can't say that there are no, that there are no magazines, there are no publications that reflect the beauty of non-whites or the accomplishments. But in comparison, white supremacy decides what is beauty and what is worthy of attention and what is worthy of accolades, and that is what gets in the press. And again, white supremacy is made up. It's a system, but it's made up of people who reflect white supremacist beliefs and policies. And the criminal justice system isn't a system, an anonymous system. It is people that put other people in prison. It is people that criminalize other people. Educational system is made up of people. So when we talk about the system, it is people that are running those systems.
White people?
White people. Predominantly white people, yes.
What do you mean by reflection?
I'm sorry?
What do you mean by reflection?
Reflect, when I said that it's white supremacist value that is reflected in magazines, meaning that what white people or white people in a white supremacist system, what is valued is it is reflected, which means what is shown. What we believe on the inside is shown on the outside. So what we value on the inside, we show. So when you said that you see in magazines, on television, in movies, those faces are what is demonstrating what is valued in a white supremacist system by white people. Did that make sense?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
The other 253, do you have another question or comment?
Yeah, I had another question.
Okay, speak up loud so we can hear you, please.
Okay. If a white woman willingly engages in sexual activity with a black male or another non-white male, then after the fact charges him with rape, what should happen to these white women who charge these non-white men and put them at a further detriment?
Well, I don't know what should happen to them, but
in your opinion?
In my opinion, if there was such a thing as justice and there was the will to hold white women accountable or for their actions, there would be certainly some kind of criminal, you would have to pay like anything else. There would be some kind of charges made. There would be some kind of, it's so hard. I mean, you asked me that question. It's like, it's having to imagine that you live on Mars and that there is this world in which, which justice prevails. I mean, it's almost, the question turns you inside out because it so works the other way, and that it has always been, we live in a system that has always criminalized black men for even being in the same room as a white woman, and that white women have always had exerted and experienced a criminal advantage. And that, and of course, we live in a time where there are circumstances where that is, it happens probably less, but the point that you're making is that there are no repercussions for that kind of injustice. And we would be living in a different universe to even discuss what those would be. I mean, we're so far from being there. I don't know what the proper punishment is.
Would you say that these white women are consciously practicing racism, white supremacy?
If someone were to claim that they were raped by a black man when they weren't, yes, absolutely. I mean, that's, and I think that, and there's a certain knowledge that goes with it. There's a certain knowledge that you will be not only believed, but you will ensure that the other will be doubly punished.
If I could ask one, I have one more question. Are you appreciative of the benefits that you reap as a white woman?
Am I appreciative?
Yes.
I am appreciative and very aware. I'm very aware that the first job I ever had was one that I probably 15 years later realized that I had because I was a young, attractive white woman. And it never dawned on me until many years later that that was the case. I had assumed, I walked around believing that I was probably more talented, more engaging, more worthy of being given a chance for a job that I wasn't qualified for. So yes, and I'm very aware that I've had many opportunities that I didn't necessarily deserve, and they are part of what is called white privilege.
See, I wanted to check 214. Are you there? I see that caller on the line, but I didn't hear them the first time before I checked back through. 214, are you there? No, 214. 972.
Gus?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, but I didn't realize that the show, I have an appointment. I was supposed to be at it 20 minutes ago, and I'm sorry.
Oh, my
I didn't realize how long the show went. I'm sorry. But I did want to, is it okay for me to address the question, that, or is that not fair because he's not on the line?
I don't know. Well, whose question was it, I guess?
The question of the gentleman that thought it was, that believed what I was saying was racist by when I had suggested that there would be concern.
No, I think I said that. I think I said that. I said your concern about the welfare, or your concern that the mixture of the families. I'm trying to figure out if two people, and I may be wrong, but if two people, regardless, black, white, purple, whatever, but in this case, let's just keep it the white because I happen to be the white guy married to the black woman. I'm just really missing the black. Yeah, I'm just really missing how someone like me, who I'm a victim of racism too. I've taken a pretty good butt kicking from black people because I'm married to a black woman. I mean, and so I don't understand how I cannot be a victim of racism. That doesn't make any sense.
Well, you're married
hold on one second, Ms. Secours. If I could make a request, and you can feel free, take it either way you want to. If you can only take one last question, I think there was a non-white person who has a question, and since you and I at least agree that we're in a system of white supremacy, I think the non-white people need more help. So if there's a non-white person who has a caller, I would like to request that you take that call if you can only take one. If you can take them both, then feel free to knock his question out, and then we can get that non-white call.
Okay, I'll take them both. I'll take them both.
Okay.
I'm the one that went back to it.
Okay.
What I had said was, first of all, you are married and in a relationship with someone who's a victim of white supremacy, which makes you related to, but you are not a victim of white supremacy yourself. And you may feel all kinds of emotions and have all kinds of experience many white people don't have because of your experience and your relationship, your committed relationship. But that doesn't make you a victim of white supremacy. It makes you related to closely someone who's a victim of white supremacy, but you're not per se a victim. And what I said before about the concern is that if I had a child who was looking to marry a person who was non-white, my concern is that they both were aware of what they are facing and what their children will be facing. I'm not saying that it is something that should be forbidden or not done, but to be done without awareness of what that means, to me, is unfair and unconscionable, really. And so when I said I would be concerned, that is where my concern, not because I would be concerned that I had a mixed grandchild, but that I would have a mixed grandchild that was not being prepared or raised in a household that it was aware of what that was going to be or could potentially be. That's what I was saying.
Right on. Last one. I believe there's a non-white male who said he had a question. If you could shoot your question, this will be the last one.
Yeah, Mr. Secours.
Speak up, please. Speak up, please.
Hello, can I be heard?
Much better.
I can hear you, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Would you say that the system of white supremacy gives white people a criminal disadvantage?
Yes. Absolutely. I think that is without a doubt, yes. And I think that there are hundreds of examples of ways that the advantages have played out literally, that whites have a criminal advantage. And just the disparity in sentencing, the disparity in types of crimes that are enforced. I mean, if you look just for one example, crack cocaine and cocaine and the differences in sentencing and who goes to jail for what and for how long. And I mean, that's an obvious, that's an obvious example. And I think there are many more. And yes, I think it's criminal. Yes.
Hello?
Hello?
The white man, he said he is a victim of racism, right?
That's what he said, yes.
How is he a victim of racism? He's a white person.
Yes, and that's what I was saying to him, was that he is related, connected, married, emotionally involved with someone who's a victim of racism, but he is not. He may have more understanding or may have more empathy or more consciousness, but he is not a victim of white supremacy. He is married to someone who is a victim of white supremacy.
I agree.
You do agree?
Yes, I do.
I agree too. Molly Secours, if you can give them your website one more time, and we'll wrap things up.
Okay, it's and I'm sorry I have to leave. It's mollysecours.com, SECOURS, and mollysecours.com, and my articles are on there. It's like I said, it's a website, and I haven't actually visited myself in quite some time because I've been ill, but it will be updated soon. So I think the most recent article is probably a year and a half old.
Okay. We will be looking for the updates. And Whispering Black, do you know when that's going to be coming out?
Well, again, I started it. I finished the first draft a week before I got diagnosed. So I'm just kind of finding my legs again, and I'm getting back to it. So it'll probably be another 8 to 12 months.
Okay. Sometime next summer.
Sometime, hopefully. Thank you. That offers me a little bit of a goal. Somebody saying it out loud.
For sure. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. We really appreciated it, and perhaps you can come back in the future and chat with us again to get constructive information.
Well, absolutely. It's been a pleasure and a learning experience. And Justice, thank you so much for your questions. It was nice talking with you. And thank you so much. I'm sorry?
I said thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I look forward to it.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Take excellent care of yourself, and we will be looking out for your work to come out in the future.
Okay, thanks. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Right on. Justice and Gus T. Renegade wrapping up the program. Again, want to plug Cree 7, Counter-Racist Evolving Engineer. Her program will be this Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. I should be doing another program related to racism, white supremacy. It should be constructive. Please check it out if you think it would be a constructive use of your time and or energy. Before we sign off, Justice, do you have any comments that you would like to share about today's program, if you think it was constructive or if you learned anything?
I learned a lot, and it was a constructive program.
Groovy. Can you share one thing with our listeners that you learned from today's program?
I learned that I can't think of any right now, but I learned a lot.
Okay. We will check back in perhaps the beginning of next show. You can share with us after you had some time to think. You can share one thing that you learned with us.
Okay.
Okie dokie. And the next program, Tuesday, August 18th, 2008, presidential candidate, Green Party presidential candidate and 6th-term elected member of the House of Representatives, Cynthia McKinney, will be on the program next Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Cynthia McKinney. That should be a very, very interesting broadcast. And the following day, Public Enemy's Professor Griff will be on the program. That is Wednesday, August 19th, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Both of those next week. The context of white supremacy should be two very interesting guests. I suspect they are both victims of white supremacy. Thoroughly enjoyed today's broadcast. I want to thank Platinum Queens West. She emailed me some very constructive videos. Looking forward to hearing her program as well this weekend, 3 p.m. on Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Pacific. The context of white supremacy. We will be back next week, hopefully to share more constructive information to help you replace white supremacy with justice. Gus T. Renegade and Justice signing off. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you next week. Everyone take care. For the non-white people, do the best you can to compensate for your victimization. I know it gets rough. Do the best you can. Don't forget to ask white people for constructive assistance when you need it. Very important. Justice, Gus T. Renegade. Catch you next program. Thank you for tuning in.